Okay, committee, it is 9 o'clock, so I just want to start getting everybody organized here.
Excuse me, guys.
And we are live.
Mayor.
Committee. Councillor Zavitz and Councillor Edwards, we are live. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kent, thank you. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is, according to the clock, 9:01 a.m. on July 11th. Welcome to everybody. It looks like we have full members present here today, with one joining us electronically. I'd like to confirm that our CAO clerk and members of the senior management team and staff are here and present. We received no public comments, but just a reminder to those in the public that if you do have those, please send them to TML public comment at muskokalakes.ca. A reminder that today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Township of Muskoka website and YouTube channel. By participating in the open public meeting today, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. We have no supplementary agenda, so at this point, we'd like to ask committee if there's any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay. Seeing none, thank you. I don't feel like I need to do the explanation on the motions and voting today, simply because we really don't have much in front of us today. At this point, I would like to read one, and that is to allow us to suspend the rules of procedure as it relates to the speaking time for today's conversation. So moved by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Edwards, be it resolved that the rules of procedure related to speaking times be suspended for the discussion and presentation related to the Township procedural bylaw, and that the rules of procedure be reinstated at the conclusion of said item. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. And just before I hand the floor over to our clerk, I just wanted to take a step back and explain the purpose of today's meeting is really around a discussion on, and I'm going to use the term used last month, about how we conduct our business. So our procedural bylaw and second report today is on working groups. The intention today is really for all of us to have a discussion, perhaps learn one or two new things as it relates particularly to the procedural bylaw, and also for us to input. So if we have questions, if we have comments, we have concerns, our staff are listening. The intention today is not to read a resolution after any of these presentations, but staff will be coming back. If they hear something that requires a further amendment, they will be coming back at a future, I guess, general and finance meeting with a staff report with any kind of refinements or amendments at that point in time. And just a final note, and then I will hand it over to our clerk, is that tomorrow's meeting, we have a few items regarding amendments that we talked about last month on our council agenda. That isn't the purpose of today's conversation. So just as a reminder, procedurally, we spoke about those three items last month, and those will be an opportunity for us to talk to tomorrow again at council meeting. So today's meeting is really about procedural bylaw and anything new. So at this point, I think I will turn the floor over to Councillor, sorry, the clerk. Thank you. Oh, and just a quick reminder, I was asked to remind everybody as staff is making their way to the podium that we are just suspending the speaking time today, but a reminder to continue to filter the questions through the chair. Thank you.
Going to wait for the presentation to go up. Next slide, please. Great. So to pick up from where the chair left off, and good morning, everybody. So last meeting, I wasn't here. So I was away on a senior leadership course for my Canadian Forces Reserve commitment. So I had the benefit of watching the tape cold after the fact. And when you considered the amendment to the procedural bylaw last time, and you'll recall that there was three pieces to it: hybrid meetings,
Thank you. The question has come up. Can I see this screen okay? And I would say probably not, but I can see that screen okay. So I just don't know if that screen has been moved for a purpose. Thank you. Thank you. That's much better. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Good. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to discuss the procedural bylaw. The clerk and me is very excited that we get to talk procedural bylaw for
Sorry, Crystal, we can't hear you online.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the purpose of today's presentation is to gather some information, share thoughts on how public meetings are being conducted and how you would like your meetings to run. With myself being newer to the role, I am really happy that we can have this conversation, make sure that the procedural bylaw is working for you. So there were a number of changes presented at the last GFC meeting. And as the chair mentioned, those proposed changes are going to council tomorrow. So we'll have further discussion if you want to on those items tomorrow, because we do have a couple of members of the public who would like to speak to those as well. There are no recommendations at this time, and any proposed amendments would come back to committee for consideration at a later time. Next slide. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about meeting stakeholders. So I know when we're talking about meetings, a lot of times as staff, we think, staff's role in the meeting, counselors, you think about your role in the meeting, and then the public, what their role is in the meeting. So just kind of some very high level purpose of kind of what or everybody's role. So the public is here for information requests to better the township. Counselors provide leadership through strategic decision making, and staff provide thoughtful and knowledgeable advice on complex subjects. So my first question for you all, the back one, is how do we balance open and transparent, procedurally fair process with efficient and effective meetings? If anyone has any comments.
Committee, does anybody have any question or comment? Councillor Nishikawa.
Where do you want to start? Like, no, I am serious because I don't know if the question is more about should we be giving people more time, or is that the direction that we're going in this conversation right now? I'm just not clear.
So in regards to, sorry, through the chair,
yes.
In regards to the timing of meetings and the delegations in that regards, I know you did receive a letter about that yesterday as well. That's kind of being discussed tomorrow because that was part of the amendment. So it's just kind of an all around.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, sorry.
Councillor Broche, sorry, I think, could you help simplify the question? Like, what would you like to hear from us? And then that I think will spark a few more questions or comments.
I would be happy to do that.
I'm just going to let the clerk and then I'll let you.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to maybe go through, so we have some more questions that maybe are a little bit more refined rather than quite so broad, and we can come back to this one at the end if that might.
Maybe that's a good approach.
Okay.
But I do think I now have two. This is great. To Councillor Burry and then Councillor Zavitz.
So I'm going to thank you through you. I'm going to try and answer this. So we're talking about a balance. So open and transparent and a procedurally fair process. I think the most important thing for council is to be prepared. Councillors need to have read the deck. They need to understand the deck. If they've got questions of staff, they need to ask them before the meeting, if appropriate, and really come to the table with a pretty good understanding of the kinds of things that we're being asked to make strategic, not tactical, strategic decisions on. You know, my experience is much more boardroom than council, but I have some council, and I do recognize that we have to have some dialogue, and it's important for people to be able to speak. But when we get questions of a tactical nature that are clearly in the deck, I don't think that's very respectful to each other. And I think that if we want to get into a process where we can hear the public, we can get good tactical direction from staff, and that we can then, as a council, make a strategic direction over where are we allocating our budget, or where, you know, what are we doing? I think that's the way we're going to get really effective meetings.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. Through you. Again, I think the reason that I thought we were here today was certainly we need to be more user friendly. That's something that I've seen over the last 5 years, and I've been in this chamber pre that with the Battle Falls group, and the people, our people, the taxpayers need to know and feel that they are being heard and that they are being respected. And so I'm not so sure it's as much procedurally how we come to a meeting. I mean, and be prepared to Councillor Guy Burry's comments. I would have thought that today was all about how we can enhance our service offering as a township to the people, and make, you know, these systems, some of these systems, the reason we're looking at them, they're not user friendly, right? They're, you know, 2 minutes. What's 2 minutes? You know, we always are watching people fall at a time, right? So, I mean, that's the kind of thing I think that's the hard discussion is, should we elongate some of those opportunities for people to speak and be heard? And then we can understand, as Mr. Burry says, you know, what it is that we're to be discussing. Because I don't think sometimes it gets out there. So I would suggest that user friendly, being, you know, user friendly has got to be the absolute A piece of this priority for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. Through you. Much what coming prepared. And but I'm wondering if we could expand that a little bit, because one of the things that I really enjoy at district, because our agendas are very heavy, and I do enjoy the opportunity to meet with senior staff the half hour before the meeting. They're just always available, and I've used that. Sometimes it's just a really checking that I understood what, you know, what was actually happening. And I'm just suggesting that happens here as well.
Okay.
And it's not, we're never interrupting them.
Yes.
They're here specifically for us, is what thank you.
That's an interesting idea. I'm already taking notes. So, so far what I've heard anyways is preparation. And I would almost extend that to all stakeholder groups, is ensuring every stakeholder group is prepared in advance of the meeting to the best of their abilities to be able to ensure that the meeting runs as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And I think the goal of being focused on making sure that those members of the public have the best experience they possibly can when coming to the council chamber. So if we make those guiding principles. So now I see 2 more hands. This is exciting. We haven't even got off the slide yet. Councillor Burry and then Councillor Kent.
Well, I'm gonna I think take Councillor Zavitz's comments maybe a little further. So I think it's really important we become more user friendly. Agreed. Taking away 2 minutes, 5 minutes, very arbitrary. I'd really like to hear what people have to say. But what I don't want to have to sit through is multiple people saying the same thing. I know that in a delegation that we made against a neighbor many years ago, 3 of us spoke to it. We each delegated. There was not one point that was duplicated with the 3 people. So we came prepared. You'll hear prepared a lot from me, I think, with very thoughtful notes on the kinds of points we wanted to make sure the councillors understood about the problem set. So when we have people coming to council, if we've got 3 people from the same household, I would like our chairs to be able to have a hammer that the mic is shut off if they start repeating themselves, because that does not help us. We're as a group pretty intelligent, thoughtful, considerate, but saying the same thing more than once isn't very helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I've seen you taking the note, and that's the importance of helping our public be as prepared as they possibly can, because there are some that are very comfortable, come here frequently. Most are coming here as a first time. And I think there's a lot of, I would use the word anxiety about the process itself, never mind coming before if you haven't done it before. So anything we can do to try and make that an easier and set expectations to the comments that Councillor Burry said. Okay, Councillor Kent and then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. My question may be confused, but it would be very helpful for me to have the delegations speak when the matter is then discussed. So rather than putting all the delegations at the front and then forgetting the issues, and I think not giving them due justice in terms of our attention and time, hear the delegations when the specific matter is being discussed, whether it be a property that's being discussed or a, administrative matter. I think the separation doesn't give them time to respond when we're engaged in the issue. And it also isolates it into like some complaint that comes in out of the blue, not related to the matter that we're looking at. And I think that's just a simple procedural thing. And it may be done for that reason historically in a way, I don't know the history on that, but that's just my suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
I also think 5 minutes is a proper amount of time because people keep.
Okay, just as a reminder, we're going to be talking about that part
Yeah,
tomorrow.
Mhm.
But I do want to bring up, because I think the first part of your comments, and maybe I can ask our clerk to I don't know, do you want to at this point respond? Is that the appropriate thing? I know you have other slides.
I do have a few more slides, and I do have some further considerations along those lines if we want to say that, but I'm happy to respond now, whatever.
Why don't you respond now, and then it'll allow us to have a better conversation when you get to the slides.
Absolutely. So it is certainly a fine balance, and having the information when the matter is in front of you. I understand a lot of times that's like a planning matter or something along those lines. The kind of the thought process behind having them at the beginning of the meeting was that so that people didn't have to take an entire day off or have to set aside an entire afternoon. So right now with the timing of the meetings, we can kind of give them a couple hours of window depending on when council would start. With General Finance Committee starting at 9 a.m., we can kind of give them a start time. So it was just a way that they didn't have to take a day or take a half a day off in order to be ready to speak to that item. It again, it's council's decision, but that was where that came from.
Can I just
Okay,
ask
thank
one?
you. Thank you for just a second. So Councillor Kent, just a reminder, sorry, you did do it, but I'm trying to reinforce right now coming through the
I
chair
thought we
with everybody.
We
Just the amount of
eliminated
time.
some of the procedures today.
No, just the amount of time, not that one. And it's just, this is intended just more to get us all more familiar with it. So please go ahead. I just was reminded. Your mic.
My question is, if you're talking about their time, I think it's more respectful to them to say that now I find that people come online and make their presentation, and then maybe 2 hours later, they try to find out when the matter is going to be discussed, and they have to keep track of that and then sign back in. This way, they'd only have to sign in once when the matter is being discussed rather than administratively. And I think that's, in terms of people's time, less respectful, because that means they're really waiting around to hear what happens when the matter is actually discussed. It would allow them to only come in once.
Okay.
So just
Yeah,
an
thank
aside.
you. Councillor Edwards and then Mayor Kelly, please.
Yes, and that further to what Councillor Kent said. Imagine driving up from Toronto, doing your speech and then saying, well, you may have to wait till this afternoon to hear what we're going to say. So you leave. It's like we're almost doing it in closed session afterwards because make your speech, leave, and then we'll talk it over. They should be talking over right at that time, making a decision. That's one thing. Secondly, if somebody comes up from Toronto to speak on an issue, they may not know what the other person is going to say. And they've driven all that way to speak. So they may repeat a little bit. And 2 minutes isn't very much time to get your thing. What I have a problem with is professional planners coming in here that know they have 5 minutes and droning on and on with their thing. They're professional. They should know. The average public coming in here that's not used to it is nervous, and that you give them a little bit more time. And that we want to be user friendly, and we're not. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good, actually a really good comment. The professional planners might fall into their own category, right? Or professionals of any, I shouldn't say pick on the one group, but might follow under their own set of guiding documents. Thank you. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. I just want to just throw my 2 cents out, and that is basically I haven't heard anything here that I disagree with, but I hear a lot of things that I don't think are the subject of today's discussion. And I know we're all eager, and I know we're all sitting here, and it's early in the morning, and we can't wait to get stuff off our chest. But frankly, the way I've been looking at this is I think CAO Hammond said earlier, this is a multi-step process. Today's step, my humble opinion and my vernacular, is about setting the bones. It's about identifying the structure, the way we want it to work, the roles of council, the roles of the standing committees, the subcommittees, and the working groups, and how they're to be engaged and how they're to work together. At the end of the day, we are the servants of those who elected us, not just elected us, but those residents of this township. And so we do need to accommodate things like time and timing and the inconvenience of delegation and waiting for an answer. But I think the first thing we need to do is understand how we're going to get huge volumes of work done. Some of it very strategic, some of it policy driven, but at the end of the day, some of it, when we get into the working groups, very tactical and very focused, and frankly, relying on expertise that generally isn't available within these 4 walls. So we're going to get into, I think, 3 other issues or a couple of other issues, some of which have been talked about today. If we want to just kind of focus today on the issues of working groups, standing committees, subcommittees, and council as a whole, there's nothing we can do to write down that says you have to be engaged, you have to be a leader in the community, you have to show up, you have to be prepared. I mean, we aren't going to fix that by resolution or by bylaw. That's a given. That comes with the role that we've taken on when we got elected. But these other matters need to be addressed. I personally have opinion and tend to agree with what I've heard today. We don't give enough time. 2 minutes is not enough time for anything. So how do we address that? I don't think that needs to be dealt with today. I think that's on the agenda for tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. And I'd like to suggest we focus on the stuff. We got a lot of stuff to cover off here. Throwing stuff up and floating it is all good and everybody agrees, but I don't think we're going to get any of that fixed until we solve the first problem, which is what's the structure look like.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands at this point. So why don't we move on to your next slides? Because I think you have some guiding discussion points. Is that correct?
I absolutely do. A few more questions to throw. So thank you. Through the chair. Next slide, please. So kind of building on what the mayor just said, kind of looking high level at what the procedural bylaw is. So the procedural bylaw is a document that governs the calling, place, and procedures of a meeting. So it is one of the bylaws that you are required to have under legislation. So this is just kind of a quick definition of what the purpose of the of the procedural bylaw is, and I'm curious if anybody disagrees with anything up there. All right, next slide, please. The purpose of it. So as it relates to the first slide, the purpose is to kind of create a balance between community access and being open and transparent, good government, with being respectful, efficient, and conducting productive meetings. So we're always kind of balancing those two sides, making sure that you're able to make the decisions that you need to make around this table with sound, good information, as well as making sure that it's done in an efficient manner that's respectful to all the parties. Next slide, please. This is just a slide for your information. So just some information on roles, and this comes right out of the procedural bylaw of what the role is between the chair and the members. So as we see today, making sure that we're speaking through the chair decides the speaking order, that type of thing, and is also responsible for calling the question. I did put a little bit of an asterisk beside calling the question because, of course, as you as a member of council are always welcome to ask the chair to call a question, and by 2/3 vote, the question must be called.
No, that's okay. Councillor Nishikawa?
Thank you, through you, or actually, do you have the answer? That 2/3 vote thing is relatively new to the Township of Muskoka Lakes. And I'm wondering how we got here. Because in fact, I don't agree with it, but I wanted to know, how did we get here?
That's a great question to ask me, but I think it's better with either our clerk, Peter? Okay, Mayor Kelly, please.
Thank you. And through you, my recollection is about 4 years ago, almost exactly, we went through an exercise of revamping the bylaw. And it was at the time, I think the belief of predominantly the head of council, the mayor, and a couple of others, the clerk, that we have this kind of escape hatch that says you got to have a 2/3 vote just to vote on calling the question. It is not, I shouldn't say it's not traditional. In my experience, it's new. It's certainly different than it was 5 years ago. And I have not seen it used, frankly, many other places. So again, something that we might want to come back to at some point when we decide how we want to call the question. The other, the more standard approach, I think, is more like a shotgun. You just call the vote and there's no more discussion and everybody votes. Yeah.
If I may,
Thank you.
sorry.
Yes, Councillor.
Well, I just wanted to say that, it worked really well for many, many years. And I think my experience when we did have to call that, it really disrupted the whole process at that point.
Right. Okay. I see staff is taking note. Is that correct? Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, not only that, if you're doing a 2/3 vote, it should be just a show of hands. You don't need a resolution like they were pulling up the last council. You have to have a resolution to bring it forward. It's a show of hands, show it in the minutes. There's a 2/3 vote and it's done. You don't have to have all these resolutions. We get paperwork to death.
So calling the question is noted. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I do support the 2/3 majority to go through, because I felt in some instances past term that all of a sudden it's done, where I thought there was more information forthcoming and I would have wanted it to go on. So I support the 2/3 agreement that we call a vote.
Okay, thank you. Again, we're not voting on anything today. Our staff is just taking note, and we'll come back with a future staff report with anything they've heard today for us to have a more robust discussion. So just a reminder. Okay.
Thank you. And if I can add on to that as well, if there's things that come to you after the meeting that you'd like to discuss, or you have some ideas on, my door's always open. So happy to discuss it further as we work to continually improve this bylaw. So before we move on to the next set of slides, just taking into consideration all the comments thus far, over the past few months, staff have observed and identified areas in the current bylaw that could potentially be considered for future changes if desired. So I've heard a lot of them here today. These are just a few that just to kind of have in the back of your mind of things that you may want to consider as we move forward. So the first one is speaking times and debate. So speaking times, this is of council, and debate of council. So there's the current section. Some things to consider is, do you want to have a limit on time? Do you want to have a limit on the number of times that somebody can speak? Do you want to have a limit on the number of questions or comments? Do you want to remove the limit? So these are just some things to kind of have in the back of your mind right now for each matter. Each councillor would have 5 minutes in total for all questions and comments per matter. So that's currently what the procedural bylaw says.
Okay, committee. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Councillor Busienss.
Well, as somebody who's been chairing for 6 months now, I don't know how we could keep track of 5 minutes. Some topics are very complex, and we have lots of very smart people around the table who put a lot of energy into it, and I wouldn't want to limit anybody's ability to get their important thoughts out as long as they're not repeating themselves over and over again. So I don't like any limit on, frankly, on number of questions or time spent. It is up to chair to decide, when it's been discussed enough.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, and I would echo Councillor Busienss's point. My point is actually even broader than that. If this becomes an exercise in keeping track of who's spoken and for how long, the content's going to go right to the drain. I mean, if all we're doing is looking at stopwatches and trying to keep track of things, I don't think we're going to get really substantive discussion. That's my concern. And the other thing is there is leave. It says of council, but I thought it was leave of the chair, that time could be extended.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. One thing, and I wouldn't say it's the specific council at this time, but in the past council, the chairs would get into their views and their opinions and dialogue and that type of thing without leaving the chair. And it worked really, really well in past councils when the chair would step aside, have it all, and someone else, the seconder or person that's chosen to sit in place of them would take that place. But that dialogue was specific to them, away from the chair, and it could be heard more rather than sometimes we get back to, are they allowed to keep carrying on? Like the chairs should be stepping aside when they want to speak on a topic.
Right.
That's the way we used to do it, and I think it works really well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. And through you. And just in response, I understand the value and the need, the importance of the chair not engaging in the discussion, which is why we've really done two things. We do have, I forget what we call ourselves, a chairs committee. We try to analyze our performance as chairs after each meeting, the three chairs, including me, with the assistance of the clerk and the CAO. To try to get better every time. And I think at the present time, we believe we're satisfying your concern by making the chair speak last. So holding the opinion until everyone else has spoken, when the decks are clear, stepping in. It doesn't always work that way, but that's how it's supposed to work.
Sorry, I again.
Thank you.
Through you, sorry.
Councillor Nishikawa.
There's a step in there that's missing, and I believe it's the chair is supposed to be very neutral, in my opinion. When the chair has an opinion, whether it's at the end or at the beginning or whatever, I really feel that it should be separate from the chair position.
Thank you. Councillor Burry.
Thank you. Through you, let's try and recognize that the original intent of putting time limits on was to stop filibusters, right? It's a procedural bylaw to stop people from extending meetings inappropriately. So maybe it's, you know, hitting the finishing nail with a sledgehammer. And there's a way to do it. And I'll come back to, you know, a mutual respect and good dialogue will make it that these are one of the things that you never have to deal with.
Yes, okay, thank you. I think the key is preparation allows us to probably ask the right questions and add the comments appropriately. So thank you. I can see our clerk and then Councillor Busienss.
If I can just add to the discussion. So right now, because the procedural ballot does say 5 minutes, I don't want everyone thinking they have to be stuck to those 5 minutes. It does allow for chair's discretion at this time. So I don't think it's something that, you know, it's something we can look at as we move forward, but I just don't want anyone to be alarmed that right now they must be held to the 5 minutes because it does allow chair's discretion for comments.
Thank you. And I think the goal, it goes back, if I could just add to, are we doing effective and efficient meetings? It's not one, we're not just here to do an efficient meeting. The whole idea is to make sure we make good quality decisions. So Councillor Busienss.
Thank you. And just as a clarifying point on the last point about chairs participating, my understanding of our use of Robert's Rules of Order is that the chair is allowed to give an opinion without stepping aside. He is not allowed to debate.
So perhaps I can ask the clerk to add comment on that.
It's always a tough one, but per Robert's rules, the chair can state an opinion or state how they are going to vote on the matter. But you're correct; they cannot engage in debate without first leaving the chair.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Edwards.
Yes, when you're talking time limits and that, I would have no time limits. We have had issues at council. Previous councils would know what they are. They go on for a long time. Legacy, Cleveland House, the power plant in Bala, and that you can't limit something like that. So I wouldn't, and that the chair should be able to control the meeting, see which way it goes.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. All right, next slide. So the next one is on delegations and public comment. So I don't want to dive too much into the changes that are going to be before you tomorrow for adoption through the bylaw, but just another one for consideration. And I think I know which way this one's going to go, but we do have area municipalities here who limit the number of delegations who come to a meeting. So they might limit it to 3, I believe the district does. I know another municipality who limits it to 2 per meeting. And so this would just be on delegations. So again, remembering that there's 3 different types of ways that people can come and speak to council. So as I've been discussing in the past few weeks, I kind of call them 3 different buckets. So you have the public comment, which means that the agenda is put out and somebody wants to speak on a matter on the agenda. So there'd be no limit to that. So that's public comment on a matter on the agenda. The next one is the delegation. A delegation is a new matter. So it's not something that staff are already working on. It's not something that's already in progress. It's a new matter. It's a new idea. For example, we had one a few months back where there was a company who wanted to place some kayak rentals on a property. So that would be a delegation. So that's kind of a different bucket. And then the third one is an invited presentation. So that's where the mayor, chair, or member of council would like somebody to come and present, and they can request them to come as an invited presentation. And that would be separate. So this would be a limit on the delegations, which is kind of that middle bucket. So that's something for consideration.
Thank you, committee. Councillor Roberts. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Through you, Chair, to the clerk, I have a question. Delegation specifically, have in the past, since you've been here, and maybe the CAO can comment on the previous meetings, how many, are we having a lot of delegations on new business at a meeting? Have we had a lot of?
Thank you. I'm going to ask the clerk to comment.
I would say that we've had more than prior to the election. That being said, this does tend to be a time when a lot of user groups, a lot of people want to come forward to council because it's a new council. So we have had more than 2 or 3 at some meetings, but I would preface that by saying that is normal for any type of council or any council because of the time of term that we're in, being at the beginning of the term.
So the question is, do we want to limit the number of delegations, not the invited presentations, not the public comments, but just the sheer number of public delegations or requests? And then maybe the question could be, do we have quite a few every month that we're trying to manage through?
So I believe this month on general finance, we have 3. So that's just for this month. I think we already have 2 lined up for next month. So you're typically seeing say 2 to 5 per meeting. And again, not looking for any type of decision today. It's just something for everybody to consider to see, is this something that we might want to consider moving forward?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zavitz.
I thank you, and through you. I think one of the things too, monthly, it's also the type of delegation. Let's be honest. We have special interest groups that come forward every month. So we do have the MLA and the Friends of Muskoka, and they tend to, if I can use the terms, they tend to aggregate as MLA. Okay, there's the MRA. There's and of course our Muskoka has become fairly outspoken, and so it's almost like there's placeholders for, you just kind of assume they're always going to be here every month on whatever issue is, and they have contributed to where we got to on dark sky and on the tree preservation and on so many other issues. So I don't think we categorize the delegations, but it's hard to get too fine-tuned this to too much of an extent, because then I think we might end up shooting ourselves in the foot by cutting out a group or whatever. 2 or 3. I mean, the public, this is their opportunity to come forward. So I think we should hear them.
So just for clarity, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the public comment. Like if there is an item on the agenda, at this point, anybody can still come and talk to whatever that item is under public comment, correct? The invited delegate, or sorry, not the invited delegate, the delegate is almost a completely separate. It's never been really talked about or contemplated, and it's a new idea.
That is correct. So right now, the current bylaw, so not looking at the amendments that are coming forward tomorrow, the current bylaw kind of lumps them all together as one. We're looking at breaking those 3 out. So then a further consideration is, do you want to look at limiting any number of those? And then, like I said, not looking for a decision, but just something for you to consider as we move forward kind of with this new framework with the 3 different types.
Okay, Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. And to you, I guess, I'm not sure who's going to answer this question, but I guess my thoughts were essentially it's staff that has to decide how much room is available on that agenda. And that particular person that wants to come and speak, and what that whole, again, we're relying on staff to determine that this is not just going to be a 5-minute delegation, that the whole discussion could end up being a half an hour or an hour, that type of thing. So that's in there. I don't quite understand how we can put anything in place without relying on staff to determine who and when is going to be on the agenda. And I don't have a picture of what that looks like, honestly.
Thank you. I actually think that's a very good comment, because my experience thus far has been on the general finance agenda is every month there is a bit of a dance that happens, because I think we would all agree these meetings have been going beyond the prescribed timeline. So there is a bit of a dance happening where we do want to hear from people. You can guess at how long a conversation might have after a fact. But all of these pieces contribute to longer meetings, again, to be more effective and efficient. I think the idea is, do we want to limit it or not? And I think staff, I can see our CAO wants to chime in. So I'll let you take this. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's interesting to Crystal's point that we're at that period of that psych part of the council term where we seem to be getting a lot of delegations. It's almost like there's a bit of a logjam and trying to understand the purpose of the delegation. Is it more of a touch point to let you know what that organization does? And if we've got a heavy agenda with respect to reports, at some points we've asked the delegate, are you okay with going to the following month? So we're kind of monitoring this at this point to see if is this a thing, or is this just sort of a point in time where we're experiencing a little bit more interest in delegating just to present information to you. So I think it's something we're just sort of feeling our way through at this point. And if we really do need to change it up, then we'll come back to you with some ideas there.
Thank you. I believe Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. And through you, I just, for my own 2 cents worth, I have a really difficult time imagining limiting the number of delegations. I have frankly, I can't understand limiting anybody to less than 5 minutes, especially me, to less than 5 minutes in discussion. But I do know that we have to do a better job as chairs, eliminating the duplication and the repetition that comes even within one delegation, let alone in 2 or 3 or 4. So I think there's an incumbency on the 3 chairs to perhaps be a lot more proactive and a lot more comfortable stopping people and saying, thanks, we've heard that, and move on.
Thank you. And I think I'm looking at this as the number of delegations, and I realized that the heading says delegations and public comment. So that could be, I think I was just focused on primarily on the delegation piece, but I think Mayor Kelly and others have brought up, we need to separate these 2 items and have it a lot clearer to all of us as to how to be most effective. So I now see Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. Not to put too fine a point on it through you. There are some matters though that do come forward that you as chairs do need to consider, and it's very specifically, it seems more than not planning, and it seems more than a subset of that is when I'll just create this scenario. Staff recommends approving a particular planning matter, and 8 people are in the audience saying, no way, we want that. And we've been subject to that. So we have to listen to those 8 people for 5 minutes, tell us how they don't want it. And yet staff is actually saying there's no reason why we could stop it. So, I mean, that's going to create a lot. So that does create a lot of angst here. And we have a lot of discussion about it. And so we oftentimes shut people off, right? They'll be here as a proponent and we'll say, no, you're not allowed to speak anymore. We actually take them off the screen. So maybe that's something too we should look to fine tune. I don't know how we do that, to be honest, because I don't know how you inhibit that discussion, but those are 1.5 hour long things.
It's an interesting, and I don't know if this is tomorrow or not, so I apologize, but there is an interesting thought. And I'm going to use that example of if there's 8 people coming to delegate to one topic. And right now, regardless of the time, every time there's a transition time between each of these folks, and then there's the management of it. Is there an ability for us to say, okay, we see there's 8 people here. If you want to have one person represent and say everything, we'll give you X amount of time. So I'm just throwing that as a thought out there, because the intention is to try and hear all the comments, hear everybody, but by the nature of how it's set up, there's a system that happens. And the system in behind the scene is you have 5 people coming, each one talking about its own topic. There's the transition time. It's been noted that they have to come up and they have to, as a public comment, say, this is my address, this is my name. Somebody said that's exactly 20 seconds usually. So my point being that if you can reduce some of that time, you still get the content. And it's just a thought as we're, okay, I see their clerk.
Sorry, if I can just add to that. So I can speak to Council and General Finance Committee on those, that it could be the discretion of the chair. If that was something that they wanted to do or offer, then absolutely they could do that. Planning is its own. Yes, thank review is its own beast. So because of the Planning Act and the different requirements under the Planning Act and the requirements to hold a public meeting, it's a little bit different. So it's a little bit different when it comes to limiting or anything like that. We can't really do that. And I don't want to speak too much more on it because that's not my area of expertise. We have Derek in the room.
I think
our
our
CAO to speak to that.
So I think our CA would like to chime in. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if Mr. Pink wants to, he may have some additional comments, but essentially in that scenario, that's exactly it. It's a public meeting. So all these people are coming in disparately to make their points. I think that we deal with it fairly effectively insofar as the chair acknowledges that there's a level of interest in the application and requests at that point that, you know, the issues that are being presented, please don't duplicate to the extent that you can, and guides that discussion along, right? So it's really incumbent, as I believe you pointed out earlier, Councillor Zavitz, it's incumbent upon the chair to move the discussion along.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Edwards and then Councillor Roberts.
Yes, I was fortunate enough, I guess, at the district to chair a meeting when there was 330 people coming. And what would happen is they were going to give everyone 2 minutes and pass the mic around. And that was the thought of the staff. I said, no, you're not doing that. When they come in, they sign in. And you will have speakers and we give them 5 minutes because that's what we do at council. There was, I think, 53 signed up to speak. By the time we were finished, there were about, I think it was 45 spoke. Others took their name off because things were said. And it went very good. We did time it at that time because there were so many people, but it worked very well. There was nobody, and that is just, again, controlling the meeting.
Okay.
And that's, so I wouldn't limit people if they want to come. As I say, if they've got a cottage and they're coming from Toronto, and that I'd let them speak.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. So I just would like to speak to brand new delegations that are coming in. Someone wants to build a theme park in downtown Bella or something we have never heard before. I think we should limit those to 3. And I think that we should leave it to the discretion of staff, specifically the CAO, to say, oh, this 4th one, because of time sensitivity or something, he or she could say, yeah, we're going to have 4 this month. So I think that's how we should, brand new stuff, how we should handle it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see our staff are making notes and I think we have some more discussion items.
Next slide, please. So the next item is consent agendas. So we currently use consent agendas for minutes. So when minutes come through to council, they come through by way of consent agenda. Something to consider is applying that to other areas of the agenda. So things like some routine reports that may just be for information, as well as to bylaws. So bylaws that can be put together into one motion or one resolution could all be passed at once. So just some things to consider there in the spirit of efficiency.
Thank you. Okay, committee, any comments, questions? Councillor Bosworth.
Sometimes we seem to spend a lot of time discussing contracts. When they're $250,000, I think we should be, or tenders rather, or tenders and contracts. We should be having a discussion about it, but smaller ones, I think perhaps we could have a limit about whether we get any discussion on it or not. And, you know, we just come and it would be part of a consent agenda that we approve. Anything under, let's say, $50,000, we shouldn't be messing with that at this level.
Thank you. Councillor Kent and then Councillor Nishikawa. Sorry, Councillor Kent again through me and with the mic on.
I'm just commenting on Councillor Bosworth's comment. In a company, you'd have a policy, and if a bid comes in and it's within the budget or below the budget, you wouldn't necessarily up to some maximum threshold. So maybe in this case, it might be $100,000. Anything below $100,000 that's below or on budget does not need to be approved again because it's already been approved as part of the budget by the board. I think that's a very, very helpful suggestion to get rid of at least half of the road and other, you know, construction bylaw things that come through. And then you might decide to push it up to the max as long as it's under budget, and there was might be conditions like under budget, at or under budget, and you had a minimum of 2 bids, so that you had a competitive situation, 2 proper bids, and that would eliminate a lot of paperwork. Been approved once, don't do it twice.
I believe our CA would like to chime in, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So to both Councillor Bosenworth and Councillor Kent's points, the township has a procurement bylaw. That bylaw dates back to, I want to say, the early 2000s, so it's fairly dated. And so the spending limit that staff are authorized with is fairly low. So I know that the Director of Financial Services is looking at updating that bylaw. So what you're speaking about will happen once we update that bylaw. The spending limits, assuming that the committee and council are okay with increasing the spending limits, that would be a corresponding outcome, is that a number of those sort of lower value tenders or procurements could be completed by staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa?
Thank you. Through you, I've had some concerns because those tenders have come directly to council, and in the past, we would have seen them earlier, like we would have seen them at general finance or whatever we called that committee at the time. I'm more happier to see those come forward at general finance than council. When they do come to council, roll them in a big bundle, all those bylaws, boom, pass. But the discussion should be at general finance. And I know we had the discussion at budget time, but then, 6 months, 8 months later, we're now purchasing that backhoe or whatever. Sometimes there's a reminder, but I would like to see that come forward at general finance wherever possible.
Okay, thank you. I see our CA would like to talk.
Madam Chair, I'm going to speak to this, but I may ask the Director of Finance to chime in just to ensure that I'm correct in my statement. But so an amount is approved in the budget, in the capital budget. So council has seen it. They know that that's going to happen. The tender is the competitive process that we go through. I believe the procurement bylaw automatically refers the matter to council in that instance, not a committee. So we come to you with terms of reference on matters for requests for proposals for consulting assignments that we know that council has an interest in. That's when we come to committee. But something that's been approved in the budget that goes through a tender process, that goes to council. And I don't know if the Director of Finance has any additional comments.
Director Donaldson, are you with us? Welcome.
I am. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. So I will just add that sometimes there are time sensitivities around the release of a tender and the timing that it takes to get an award out. Bidders may only guarantee pricing for a limited period of time. So that is also a consideration in terms of bringing things directly to council, but that is certainly something that we can look at when we review the bylaw.
Thank you. I feel like I saw some other hands up. I just want to make sure I didn't. Okay, Councillor Bosenworth.
I don't know how often this is going to happen, but we have, I think it's in front of council, a long list of bylaws we have to pass with related to AMPs. And that clearly could be done in one motion, because I think we're doing the same thing for all of these little pieces to bring things like barking dogs and fires and things under AMPs. And there was a long list, and that you could certainly do that as one motion, I would have thought.
Is that an example? I'm going to ask our clerk. Is that an example of something that you're considering or you're putting out as a topic of discussion?
Thank you, through you. That is a great example. And I think you'll be very excited to see the resolution tomorrow, how we've crafted it to kind of play on today's presentation of how we can do it all in one. And then looking even further, if we could pass all of the bylaws in one and just pull out the specific bylaws that either need clarification or that a member of council wishes to discuss further. So that's another consideration, is we could just pass everything all at once and pull out anything that requires us to pull it out separately.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay,
Thank you. Next slide. So the next one's fairly quick, just something to consider. Right now we do supplementary agendas, so it's an entirely separate agenda. So where we have general finance committee agenda go out on the Friday. By the Tuesday, we could be sending out a supplementary agenda, which would be a separate agenda. Just some considerations to potentially change that to an addendum, which means that all those items would be included within the original agenda and identified on the agenda shell page at the beginning. So just a consideration for council to consider.
okay, committee, Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, through you. Never wanted to suggest that we have a lot of work to do. My sense is that 2 o'clock the day before is too late. And I would, you know, if we're gonna do something 24 hours pre the meeting, I would suggest it should be 48. And at least it buys us twice as much time to understand, you know, if it's a little thing, fine. But if it's something that gets on that supplementary agenda and it's a pretty heavy duty item, then we need to read it, understand it, to other people's point, and then find a way to work it into the schedule for the next day. And how does that impact on decision making? We come in open mind, but I just would suggest that it seems rather rushed to me that we just luckily just made it on there just before the meeting the next day. I would have no problem. People get the agenda on the Friday, and then they ponder over the weekend, and then it's a Monday, Tuesday, let's get it on there, right? That seems to be the cycle of what's been happening. I would just think it would, if we're gonna, it's for us to make sure that we can have a fulsome consideration of any item, that we should have a bit more time than that 24 hours pre the meeting.
Thank you.
Especially, sorry, if I might, especially when planning is, you know, it's funny, it's only 24 hours before the meetings, if you will, of GNF and council, but then planning is 1 day later. So you get that breath of extra time for consideration and understanding.
Yeah,
So
okay.
just for what that's worth.
Thank you. I believe our CAO would like to speak to this.
So I think Councillor Zavitz raises a really good point, and I know from a staff perspective, we try and avoid that in terms of putting a heavy duty item, because that we appreciate that's not fair to the council portion of our team. So if we do have something that comes in late, typically we'll kick it to the next round wherever we can. But point well taken.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this particular area? I do want to ask a quick question then, if I could, on your first consideration, is that to, instead of having two separate agendas, that you would be able to put the item just directly onto the, so we'd only ever have one agenda that we were looking at?
That is correct.
I personally like that idea. Okay, thank you. Councillor Zavitz?
Thank you. As would I just would wonder how you would denote the changed addenda item, the additional item in red, or how does one know that
Right,
here's what's been added,
here's what's new. the agenda.
italicized, or?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
That's a great question. The agenda building software that we utilize right now has the capability of where we can identify it as an addenda item. And then there's a little A that shows up beside the item. So when it gets added on, it goes right onto the agenda in the area that we want it to be on the agenda, and then it's identified with an A.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Councillor Edwards. Sorry, Councillor Ken.
Could I have that?
Councillor Ken, could you kindly turn off your mic? Sorry. Just set that up. Thank
Can I
you.
have that clarified? So in other words, you send out an agenda, then you send out another agenda, so we have 300 and some odd pages, and you add 10 pages, and that, is it in one spot, or is it all over? So we've got to go through the whole thing again. Because I've seen this happen, and it's annoying. After you've read, say, 300 pages, and then you have something out, and you got to look through it. It should come out separately, like at the end of it.
Thank you. And okay,
through the chair. Thank you. You are correct. It would be within the agenda. So if you're looking at the HTML version of it, you can just click on the matter and it would take you directly to it. But it would be built into the agenda. So right now we have the agenda and then we have the supplementary agenda. The reason I have this on here as a consideration is I know sometimes for the chairs, it can get a little bit not confusing. You're kind of going through, you're following that agenda, and then you're forgetting to kind of put in those supplementary items as you go along. So that was the consideration of we could just put it right into all in one agenda. But it's just an item for consideration, but you are correct. It is within the entire agenda.
Thank you. Guiding principle of user-friendly for all stakeholder groups, not just the public, user-friendly for us as well. Thank you. Oh, I see a hand up. Councillor Roberts and then Councillor Zavitz. I'm not sure if you have your hand up again, but Councillor Roberts. You're on mute. Councillor Roberts.
I'm sorry. Anyways, I'm challenged. Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes, we can't see you, but we can hear you.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay. So, adding it within the agenda, what I do is, and this is a personal thing, I actually write notes within the package and highlight it. The items that are important. That's when I'm going through the meeting, then they jump off the page at me. When we add more content to the agenda in the middle, it changes the page numbers as well. So all your notes you've made on page numbers, it now becomes complicated or more of a juggling act to figure out where you are. So I'm supportive of just having a supplementary agenda item. I have never had a problem, when it comes out, I know there it is there. And I look at it, and then when I go to discussion, I go to the supplementary agenda. So I'm not in favor of adding it within the package. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, through you. Just wondering what the district does.
Oh, thank you.
They have meetings too. I mean, is there a supplemental agenda at district, or do they somehow meld it into the existing agenda, or do they not even allow after a time anything? I mean, that's also an option.
Okay, I'll ask the clerk if you know the answer to this.
I will have to look into that because I believe I knew how they did it, but I don't want to speak out of turn. So
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Nishikawa.
I do want to add something because yes and no. Well, no. So again, everything is done at committee for the most part. So there would be a supplemental agenda. The very, very, very rarely at district council, like at the council meeting itself. Everything's done at committee. And that's where I've always been trying to focus. Let's get everything done at committee. And in fact, I would actually open up the ability to speak more broadly at committee than being limited. Because we're having heavy discussions in many cases, and but not at council. So as I said, it's very, very limited of what actually gets added to an agenda at council.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, at district, you get your agenda package. And if they're adding something, you get an email with a link to it, and then you can go on and you can click on and read it that way. It makes it simpler.
Okay.
So I would put a supplementary agenda, not adding, because I've seen them add it. And that when you get agendas coming out and then you get a new one, you got to check and say it was 285 pages. Now it's 290. You got to go through it. It's very, very confusing. Keep it separate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all those comments have been noted. Okay.
thank you. Next slide, please. So reconsidering a decided matter, there was a question at the last meeting on the timeline of it. It is 3 months right now to decide or to reconsider a decided matter. So that's after the confirming bylaw has been passed. So confirming bylaw passed, can't come to the next 2 meetings. It can be reconsidered after that. So I just wanted to provide an answer to that question, as well as make committee aware of it and see if there was any discussion.
Okay, any questions or comments? Mayor Kelly?
Thank you. And through you, I don't, it doesn't fuss me what it is, but as long as it's absolutely clear what it means. Because I think in this particular circumstance where it's two sessions, that is 3 months. Even though you're proposing 3 months as a change to 2 sessions, I think they're the same thing. So as long as we're speaking language that everybody understands, they know what they're supposed to do.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa?
Through you, I would request that we actually follow the same procedure as district, that this should be a 6 months consideration. And then mostly we're aligned with a lot of the same rules and regulations and things. I think it's confusing when district does some things, different municipalities do different things. I think the 6 months works well. I think 3 months is too short, in my opinion, because then we're just back at it again, kind of thing. And but that's where I would like to see us land.
Okay, so now I see 2 more hands come up. Councillor Boseworth and then Councillor Edwards.
For us new counselors, I was just wondering how often this happens, because I don't think we've had it this term yet.
Thank you. Clerk?
Through the chair. Since my arrival, we have not done it. Kind of subsequently to that, there aren't a lot of resolutions that are passed that can necessarily be reconsidered. There are a lot of matters that once you've decided it and you communicated the decision, that it's really tough, if not impossible, for council to go back on that. So for example, entering into a contract, once you've entered into that contract, the contract is entered into. So that plays into it a little bit. Not that there aren't resolutions that can be reconsidered. So if you're changing a bylaw and you're not happy with that change, changing it back, that type of thing, you could look at doing. But since my arrival, we have not done one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards?
I could leave it the way it is. 2 sessions is fine, 3 months, but also with the district. If something is passed, I believe it's 2 councillors can ask for a reconsideration. If it's within 24 hours, they notify the clerk. And that it's very rarely used. I would say maybe I've seen it twice in 12 years, but it is there, that if something is a mistake, then it can be rectified.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see staff is making notes, so thank you for that. Any other questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, I think we can move on.
So the next area is probably my next recommended change is to the notice of motion section. The section, and not looking to make any changes again today, but looking to bring this forward in the near future on just how motions can be brought forward by a member of council. So the bylaw itself can be a little bit confusing in how it comes forward, but just some considerations. We are sending an email out prior to publishing or posting the agenda or reviewing the agenda for councillors to put something onto the agenda, so a matter or a resolution. A consideration would be, do you want to require a seconder, or do you want that individual councillor to be able to just put something on the agenda? That's something to consider, a time frame around it, and just again kind of looking at the whole section in its entirety. It is section 3.5, so that's just providing a little bit more clarity in that area, I think would be beneficial.
Okay, see Councillor Nishikawa and then Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. I would prefer through you to have a seconder prior to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zavitz?
Yeah, and I would agree through you. I think a seconder validates to an extent, the premise of the motion, and it just takes it that much further. And I don't think it needs 3 or 4, but and that'll happen here, in the horseshoe. But I think that a seconder validates to an extent the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on that first item? And then the second, I think, was the walking on. Is that?
Yes, so walking on a motion.
Is there any thoughts or questions on that piece? Okay, so I think it's currently that we need 2/3 in order to walk on a motion. Is that, I feel like there's general consensus on that because nobody's, Councillor Zavitz.
Well, thank you. And I think with this latest iteration of our agenda, where the good clerk is inviting us to, contribute the agenda creation, it virtually wipes this one right off the road. I mean, that would be my opportunity to bring on any particular topic that has all of a sudden become urgent or warm. All of a sudden, I would think that I've got time before the Friday's agenda to get any kind of a motion put together and on there. So for me to walk on something on a Wednesday is almost a little irresponsible unless it's something that's happened between whether it's the Monday or the Tuesday of a supplemental agenda. And then, so just in terms of procedurally, how many chances do we need is my point. For me to walk on something,
No, you raise a good point. I do like this new approach that our clerk has brought forward, which is giving us all an opportunity to bring something forward proactively to reduce, because the walking on motions I have really seen and learned is very difficult, not only for us as a council, but for staff. A lot of things happening in behind the scenes, and quite frankly, right beside me, scrambling to try and get to a good place. So I think the better, again, prepared, more proactive we all can be, is probably a good guiding principle on this one. So I see Councillor Nishikawa, Councillor Busienss.
Thank you. I think you need the option open though. There are other reasons why we use it. For instance, there may have been something, a staff requirement that needs a motion brought forward. I don't think we eliminate it. I think we need to have that available. We just need to, as councillors, we need to not be the ones that are walking on things. We've thought ahead of time, but I don't think we can completely eliminate the process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Busienss.
And to supplement that point, I think we need the ability to have walk-ons when council within the meeting comes to the conclusion we need to pass the bylaw. I mean, it's rare, and I know it's discouraged because you need to usually have some foresight and thought putting into the bylaw, but you still need to have that option in an emergency where you got to create a bylaw in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I see our CA would like to chime in.
So I think, Madam Chair, thank you. I think there may be times, as Councillor Nishikawa has pointed out, that there may be something that staff bring forward that needs immediate attention. That said, I think what I've also heard through a few of the comments reflecting on last term, there was a couple of instances where council passed resolutions during meetings. And I think in the fullness of time, council probably would have gone a different route in terms of a considered approach with the staff report to provide some background, because we kind of got ourselves into a bit of trouble in terms of ultimate outcomes. So I think that's what we want to avoid. And I think Councillor Nishikawa was right. We do want the flexibility to remain, but I think we need to be prudent and thoughtful about resolutions that are going on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions or comments, I think we can move to the next item.
Thank you. So the next couple of slides are just areas of note, so no real areas for consideration. I just wanted to bring attention to the last item here. I do hear around this table a lot of straw poll. So the procedural bylaw does currently allow for consensus, calling a consensus to craft a motion, or to craft a resolution or change to a bylaw or anything like that. So you can absolutely do that while crafting a resolution, but there is a requirement that there is an official vote on the final crafted resolution. So you just need to make sure that there's always a vote in the end, but you can use those to help craft it to get to that point. So I just wanted to bring attention to that matter. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
And I think we've touched on a lot of these, the discretion of the mayor and chair in regards to speaking times, speaking order, break times, and again, calling the question, although it does allow for a member of council to do so. Next slide.
Just if I could, I believe Mayor Kelly wanted to make a comment.
Thank you. And through you, it's actually a question to the clerk. in the last month or so, I think I've received 2 requests from members of our constituency who have been watching meetings and seen something of interest to them fail, and they can't tell from the screen who voted for what. And they're asking for some clarification. And frankly, I have my own opinion on it, but I'm curious to know what your opinion is on a non-recorded vote in terms of identifying who voted for, who voted against.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So in a non-recorded vote, so in just a regular vote around the table, it is the requirement of the chair or mayor and the clerk to confirm that the vote was passed. And then it is just carried or defeated, and that is as far as the recording goes for that. Where members of the public are wanting to know who voted for what, the only way to actually confirm that from a staff or from a council perspective is if it's a recorded vote. We do our best to capture everybody, but the vote itself is confirmed by the mayor or chair and the clerk.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, Councillor Roberts and then Councillor Kent. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. For one that it attends a lot of time by Zoom, as a counselor, I have no idea sometimes how my peers have voted on a subject. Of course, I vote independently in my own thoughts, but I know I have brought this up with the clerk. I'm proposing that the chairs make sure there's a long delay of let's call it 30 seconds, so that to allow staff to show one side. There's 2 sides of the table, or actually basically 3 sides of the table, and hold the camera for the count of 3 or 4 on each side, and we all keep our hands up, and that way it will answer my concern, that, and I think the constituents' concern that identified it to the mayor. So now I guess I'm not going to leave this as a statement. I'm going to ask a question. Is that possible?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let our clerk respond first, and then I hear perhaps some comment over here as well. So.
Thank you. Through you, my answer to that would be it's of the discretion of the chair on how they'd like to conduct the meeting and how they'd like the meeting to flow. We absolutely have the cameras in place, and when we're able to do so, we show all the tables when we can do that. Another point that I'd like to raise with this as well is that once a decision is made, that council in its entirety is to support that decision as well. So regardless of how you voted, per the code of conduct, the council is to support the decision in its entirety.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm if there was any other comment.
Supplemental here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Okay, so yes, I agree with what the clerk just said, that once it's voted, it's voted. There's no really need to see anyone. But, you know, there's an expressed interest from the public as well as a councillor asking for this. So I will now direct my question to the 3 chairs. Will you please, or not question or request, would you please make sure that you give sufficient time so that staff can flip through the different views? So at least there's some chance of seeing how the vote went. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I do see another hand. I don't know if there's a few comments happening, so I just want to make sure if we have a comment, just to put your hand up so that everybody has the benefit of your thought. Councillor Kent.
Thank you. I actually have always wondered, since I've been at this now, like Councillor Busienss for 6 months, you get all this paper with the box with all the names and there's never any checks there. Why would you not? It seems so obvious to me. Check the boxes so that we have a record when we go back through it in the material that I'm now reviewing as minutes of what happened in that vote. I personally think the vote should be recorded. I'm not talking about having everybody go one by one, but I think we could record the checks in the boxes after each vote so we have a record of it. That's not just on video. I actually like that. I think it's useful for memory. I think it's useful when minutes come out. And I know that would be a change, but that's my personal view, is I think it would be good to have it recorded for the record.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to make any comments?
and responsibility.
Thank you for the comment. Just from a administrative perspective, my recommendation if we went that route would be that every vote be a recorded vote. It just doesn't leave room for error. So if whoever is recording, so whether it's the recording secretary or the clerk, checking off who voted for what, just making sure that that's being confirmed yay or nay by the member of council. I just would have some concerns in, as the vote's being taken, recording it down and that becoming a public document right away without having that confirmed by the councillor themselves. That being said, the decision would be with council.
Okay, thank you. I believe our CAO would also like to add a comment.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So interesting idea. In my experience, typically recorded votes are reserved for controversial or complex matters. And I think that this group would become quickly frustrated because more often than not, you're making decisions and they're unanimous. And I would suggest to you that the majority of your decisions are unanimous. And so in that instance, I think a lot of you will become frustrated with the process that of the additional time to record each vote when you know it's fairly straightforward. So just adding that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zavitz. And then Councillor-
Thank you, and through you, and to that point, to our CEO and certainly to the clerk. I'm as concerned, I'm interested, very interested in the notion that once the vote is taken and there's this conduct, I've been doing this for 4 and a bit years, and I wasn't aware until you just said that you know, that I am, once the vote is finished, completed, and if whichever way I voted, I am to then support the whole group of 10. And that's the first I've heard about it. That's the first I've understood that, because we're often out there in the real world, people will say, well, what's going on with that? What's, say, short-term, whatever. And, you know, I would have said, well, I didn't support it. Here's why I didn't support it. So if I can't say that, I'd like to know that now, because I've been saying it for 4 years. Very seldom, but it's in your briefcase, right? I mean, there are some things that happen out there that people aren't happy with, and a lot of people aren't happy with. And, you know, I think it's sometimes we do vote politically. And so I'd like to understand that, just in terms of this code of conduct. What am I bound to?
Further conversation.
Okay.
After the vote, I guess.
So I'm going to, Crystal, sorry, I'm going to ask our clerk to add comment.
Thank you. So similar to my answer on the chair and speaking on or debating a matter, again, it's kind of that fine line. A member of council can state how they voted, but in regards to actually supporting the overall decision of council, that's what each individual member is supposed to do. So you're supposed to support council as a collective. I'd be happy to follow up with you after the meeting as well, and we can chat further. So that's what I would offer.
I think I was going to ask our CAO, but I also would like to add comment.
I think where you find what the clerk is talking about is in our code of conduct, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
I thought it was in one of the sessions that we had on training, and that you don't knock a council decision, and that. So in other words, you can say, okay, I didn't agree with it, but council's passed it, and that's it. Basically, so this is, I think, what you're trying to think. You can't go around knocking council.
Okay.
And it's
okay.
bad business.
Thank you. Councillor Zavitz, another.
Thank you. And exactly to that point, I would never do that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm doing or have done on occasion, is though when stopped on the street and discussing a particular item, it's important that people understand. People ask how I voted, for example, the official plan, and maybe I didn't vote for the official plan because I think resorts needed more vetting. So that's fine. I can vote any way I want. And people phone me and ask me about it. And so, you know, that's discussion. We're the bridge to the community. So all I'm saying is I'm not sitting here cutting up decisions, but on that fine line, you know, if I'm to take the township line after, that's fine. You know, I'm not critical of us buying a yellow truck, you know,
Right.
but I just wonder how we're bound by that. It sounds like it's a moral line more than it's a.
I believe it's in our code of conduct, and what I might suggest, it sounds like, again, we will have other opportunities to come back, but maybe, I don't know about anybody else sitting around this table, but I've probably spent more time on our procedural bylaw in the last 5 days going through it over and over and over again, because we've had today session. So I would just say maybe we all need to do the same thing with code of conduct, just to make sure we're all familiar with it. And I think that these types of discussions are great just for that. So I am mindful of time. So I am going to ask our clerk to continue on in your presentation.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so reaching the conclusion of the presentation. So now that we've had the discussion and determined the purpose of the procedural bylaw, the final question for you is, do you believe the procedural bylaw is achieving what its purpose is, and is it working for all stakeholders? And you can just sit with that question. You don't necessarily have to answer it.
Okay, I'm not seeing anybody's hands up.
Okay.
And I think today we've had a fantastic discussion. I want to thank you, because I know I can see that you've put a lot of thought into this. And it's not always the easiest topic or the one that everybody, but clearly it sparked a lot of good dialogue, because again, this is how we conduct our business. So thank you very much for the time you've taken. We will look forward to a future staff report and some further discussion on those 3 items tomorrow at council meeting. So thank you very much to you for leading us through this session. Committee, I am mindful of time, but I am also very mindful that people would like a break. So could I ask that we come back though by 11:15? And then at that point, our CAO will walk us through the working groups. Okay, so 10:45. Thank you. Live. Committee, we are live. Committee, we are live. Mayor Kelly, Councillor McIntyre, we're all live and we are back on. I will recognize right now that we have two clocks happening here. And the one I was following is the one that's on our wall, but it seems to be a couple minutes faster than everybody else's computer. So I just want to confirm that we do have Councillor Roberts back in the room as well. And I believe we have everybody else here. Fantastic. It was just brought to my attention. So I'm going to follow the one I have currently looking at on the wall. At this point, we are going to now turn the floor over to our CAO, Mr. Hammond, to walk us through working groups.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And interestingly, I really enjoyed our conversation about the procedural bylaw. It was great to see everybody excited to add comments. And I just overheard a comment from our clerk. So I think it was something along the lines of, all of you procedural bylaw nerds line up behind her. So no, it was a really good conversation. So I'm just following up. As I mentioned, I watched the tape from the last couple of meetings, and I thought it would be helpful to put a little more meat on the bones, provide you with a little bit more information as it relates to working groups. And I heard a comment, and I would agree with the sentiment that it's something that we've used in the past. But I'd go further, and I'd suggest to you that it was necessary because we didn't necessarily have the internal bench strength that we have now. So council over the past 4 years has been really strategic and I think thoughtful in expanding our capacity in areas like economic development, recreation, bylaw enforcement, as well as communications. So in thinking about how to proceed with committees this term, the mayor and I had multiple conversations. And where we got to is we both think that we have sufficient talent around the table and in this building to deal with the majority of issues or matters that are going to come forward through our standing committee and council process. That said, there may be issues or matters that come up that we want to be more thoughtful about, have a think about. We need more information. We may need some expertise. Bring it in, help us navigate our way through whatever it is and move on from there. So the working group concept really emerged, and it was about putting work in the right hands and helping council, putting council in a position to tackle broader issues and be more strategic in your focus. And Mayor Kelly, I don't know if you wanted to add any points there.
Thank you. Sure, I will. And through you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of thoughts. My goal in entering this arena, first as a councillor, now as mayor, has been to shape the future of this township and to take control over a lot of things that I think by we, I mean council or this township had lost control over. Things like overdevelopment, things like other threats to the environment, things like a lack of appropriate housing, things like all sorts of community development, community growth things. This place deserves full focus, very strategic approach to identifying what's it going to be when it grows up and how are we going to get it there. And quite frankly, I will tell you that anything else that council deals with, in my humble opinion, is best left to other resources, whether it's committee, standing committee, subcommittee, whether it's certainly staff. We have, as our CAO has just mentioned, we've made a big investment and are seeing great dividends from that investment in areas like communications, areas like, and we're working towards, improvement in other areas on the economic development front. We're looking for a new ECDev officer, obviously, but the fact that our last one has grown into a new and, I will say better, different role, just as impactful, speaks volumes about this place as a place to come and work with opportunity for employees. Too much rambling from me, but what I really want to say is the goal of this exercise is to set a template or a structure that says everything strategic will reside at council. We will take charge of the planning and the process of identifying the right future for our township, for the people that live here, whether they're here seasonally or permanently. We will become a place that people want to come and grow families, grow a community. They'll have the assets they need to be quite comfortable and quite happy living here. We will have an environment that is welcoming to business growth so that the people who do choose to live here permanently have economic opportunity that can put food on the table, afford a house, and keep their kids enrolled in hockey or whatever other thing they want to get involved in. As we start looking at some of the stuff that we have to deal with, I'm absolutely comfortable that 95% of it can be picked up and run either with the standing committees that we currently have in place, the staff that we currently have in place. And in the rare occasion when something comes along that requires specialized skills that we don't have, it's in the form of a question or a concern or an issue. It's not a broad strategic issue. It's an issue relating to a specific type of development or a specific issue or problem from economic development. And that's where I think we need to create this understanding of what a working group is, how it should work, how we would bring one together, how we would give it its mandate to go forward, how we would monitor it in its performance, and at some point in time, how we would thank it for its good work and send it on its way to do something different. They aren't long-standing. I think part of the presentation we're going to see, they don't stand through the term of council. They stand as long as there's good work for them to do. Once the work's done, they're free to go on and do something else. And if a new issue comes up, we find the right group of people to solve that problem as well. So yeah, I think being more strategic are the key three words at our level. We were elected here to not be the victims of change, but to lead change. And I think the only way we can do that is by being strategic.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So flipping to the next slide, you've all had a chance to look at this table, and I think that the key distinctions that I would draw to your attention in their simplest form is working group, as the mayor has alluded, specific topic, start and end date, produce a product. Advisory committee, ongoing decision-making or recommendations. Next slide, please. So to emphasize, thank you. To emphasize sort of working group characteristics, nimble, get at the heart of the issue, assist with developing or identifying issues, developing alternatives, recommended solutions. Again, specific mandate, start end date, producing a product. And last point, facilitated by staff. Next slide, please. So I want to pick up on that point. So staff involvement in a working group is necessary to ensure that the product or the outputs can be implemented. I'll take you back to our strategic plan and our pending projects list. To achieve the strat plan goals, we've identified a series of major projects. A lot of them are ongoing. Staff want to be sure that whatever comes out of a working group can be integrated into that work plan. So at the essence, we want to be able to deliver on what we've committed on already, and we don't want to be over committing and under delivering. Next slide. So getting into some examples, I think if we look back, some successful examples are our official plan, Working Group, Minette Working Group, Parks and Trails Recreation Master Plan Working Group. Looking forward, thinking about potential examples, environment is pretty much at the center of everything we do. It's in the forefront of our thoughts. In fact, I would argue that it was in each and every one of your election platforms. If we think about that and we think about climate change, this municipality has been impacted by the effects of climate change, namely flooding. And I don't really need to say any more because that's been a focal point annually for us. More recently, we've heard about the concept of integrated watershed management, and that was in response to the 2019 flood through the report of the flood advisor along with the Muskoka Watershed Advisory Group. And there's ongoing studies happening at the district. So I think it would be important, and most recently, Councillor Zavitz and the mayor and I heard about integrated watershed management at the Moon River Property Owners Association meeting a couple of weeks back. Great interest in that from those community members. And so it would be, I think it's important and interesting to understand what is meant by integrated watershed management, how the township may or may not benefit from that approach. And so that will enable us to ensure that we can advocate appropriately and effectively to the district, the province, to ensure that we get the outcomes that we want. So if we turn our minds to what I would call community development, so the notion of economic development, parks and recreation, as the mayor's alluded, you've invested in parks and recreation. I think it would be exciting to look at what does a park system look like for the township? We have a group of parks now, but we've never really systematically looked at them and categorized them. And if we do that, identify opportunities for new ones. So looking at what is a geographic distribution per ward, per the entire township. Should we have a pan township trail connecting some of these places? That's the type of approach I think that we need to take, along with policies for the development of each of those types of parks, if you will. If we had that system in place, we'd be able to evaluate the lands that we currently own, determine whether some of them are appropriate for a park, as well as identify potential areas where we'd want to acquire land at some point, given that we understand what a geographic distribution of these things look like. So I think that's an exciting opportunity on that side for a working group as well. Moving on to the last slide for the morning. So moving forward, so you have an idea. How do you go about determining whether it sort of fits into that standing committee approach, a working group approach, or we may need an advisory committee. But as I alluded to earlier, really the mayor and I felt that in a lot of cases, the advisory committees were adding time to a decision that could have been dealt with by a standing committee. But nonetheless, if you felt that an advisory committee is appropriate, it's something that we can consider. But basically, the notion would be have a sit down with the mayor and myself. We can figure out an approach. Then that would come back through the appropriate committee and council through a resolution of endorsement for the approach to deal with whatever. If it's a working group, then we would do a call for citizens or however we're going to structure it. They get established, get working at it, get the solutions to us, and then we would implement them. So it will take a bit of time, but I think it's a different, exciting, interesting approach to solving some of the issues that face us. And at this point, I'm going to enlist the clerk and the mayor to assist me with any questions that you have with respect to working groups. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, committee, Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. Through you, I guess one of my first observations is, and I guess it's this last slide, how does a member of council move an idea forward? The first point is meet with mayor and CAO to determine if the matter should be dealt with. I guess A, should be dealt with, and if it should be, and then in what manner. I guess my only thought to that would be is, wouldn't we want a member of council to sit on that? If that's all of a sudden an advisory board of the mayor and the CAO, should there be one council member, or if is that an ad hoc, just as it goes scenario?
So Madam Chair, through you, we're just thinking about the initial idea and having a conversation about how we would evolve it. But to your point, with a working group or an advisory committee, there'd be a terms of reference, and there would be members of council that would sit on that. There wouldn't be, I believe the rule is you can't have quorum of a standing committee or council on that smaller group. But absolutely, there would be council representation on that working group and or advisory group or committee.
Thank you. Supplementary through you. So I guess just so I could understand, and others listening, is there a filter on this? Or I mean, when I bring an idea forward to you and the mayor, what's the yay nay on that? Just wonder how you establish that.
I think it's going to depend on the nature of the idea and how it potentially could flow forward. Is the idea duplicating something we already do? Is it a better way of doing it? Absolutely, we're interested in continuous improvement. I think it really is dependent on the idea. Madam Chair, I see the.
Yes, thank you. Mayor Kelly?
Thank you. And just to add to that, to my knowledge, if this is really an opportunity to try to frame it up in a way that we can bring it to council for approval. At the end of the day, if any particular councillor wants, they can bring it right to council, propose it as a resolution. We're just trying to see if there's an opportunity to frame it one way or the other as a standing committee or a working group, identify the issues that would go into a term of reference so that once it comes to council, it's kind of ready for approval. That's all.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? Councillor Bosworth?
Well, not directly related, but do we have any advisory councils at the moment?
Okay, thank you.
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Any other, Councillor Zavitz?
Thank you. Through you to that, I guess further to that question, I mean, it's been 10 months and we don't have any committees. We don't have anything right now. So I'm sort of wondering where we're going. I was hoping that this discussion would prompt, from there on. And I'm not hearing that. Whether it's a heritage or whether it's economic development or whatever it is, we don't have any committees and haven't had essentially since, I guess, October. And I'm being asked that out there. What about committees?
Okay, and thank you. Mayor Kelly or CAO?
I can lead off, as I said earlier, and I believe the mayor has echoed it. I think the majority of the business can be done through standing committees. I may have misspoke. Hall boards may be an advisory committee. I'm not sure. I don't think they qualify as standing committees. That said, I think the intention of this presentation was to suggest a couple of starting points. One of them being looking at integrated watershed management, the other looking at the parks and recreation policy or system approach.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Mayor Kelly and then Councillor Nishikawa.
And through you, I've heard very little. I do think we need to address heritage because I've heard just recently that there are some issues that need to be taken up. And I think that a committee of some sort, whether it's a standing committee or working group, needs to deal with some of it. But as the CAO has suggested, if there are specific issues, for instance, and I'm going to take a guess, affordable and attainable housing, which is kind of integral to the whole issue of economic development, that may well be something appropriate for a committee that's currently being undertaken at the district level. I'm of the opinion that it also should be shadowed by at the township level to make sure our interests are properly taken into consideration. But I have certainly not been overwhelmed with demand for anything. I think ECDev in the traditional sense that we had 4 years ago, until Mr. Moore's decision to move into a new role was being absolutely perfectly handled by him as a staff resource internally. So
And if I might, Madam Chair, just further to the mayor's point, with respect to the notion of affordable housing, that was certainly on the list to put on this slide as well. But as the mayor's mentioned, he's leading a task force at the district. And in order to ensure that we don't duplicate what's going on there, we wanted that to get out of the gate a little ways to see where it was going to go, and then come back potentially with a working group and reflect on some of that work here.
Okay, Councillor Nishikawa. And then Councillor Roberts. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, I'm comfortable with the discussion at this point of the direction that the CEO and the mayor are taking. I found last term that the whole committee situation, the way that it was set up, very, very different from previous years, was not as productive. So I'm looking forward to something a little more, but interestingly, I am very comfortable and have done this and even with committees and everything else in place in past years of bringing forward an idea to the mayor and to the clerk to see where it gets slotted in. For instance, a property purchase or those types of ideas. Often we lose a lot of time and sort of in some ways the urgency and importance all of a sudden gets quite watered down on the topic when we have to then go to a committee, then go to then bring it to general finance, then bring it like it just gets, the meaning isn't as great, and in fact we lose a lot of ability to move things forward in a I would say stuff doesn't even get moved forward in 4 years the way that we did it in the past. So I'm looking forward to looking at this change. I find it a little bit interesting that there's a concern that we don't have committees, because I don't know what we're not getting done. I don't understand that that portion of it. I would say from a hall board perspective, and we're bringing forward a new group of people on the Torrance Hall board as an example. They will also bring ideas for the community as well. So I don't want to say that we're not fulfilling anything, because I don't see what we're not fulfilling. If someone has a concern, they can come forward. They can bring it up to a counselor. The counselor can bring it forward. There's lots of ways to do this, but just to have a meeting, just because I have a meeting, has not been productive in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. CAO.
Madam Chair, I'm cognizant. I'll be quick, Councillor Zavitz, but I think Councillor Nishikawa raised a good point with respect to property acquisition. At any given point in time, there may be a property that becomes available that we hear about through a real estate listing, or we're approached. We really don't have, without a systems approach in place or appropriate policies for parks and recreation, specifically parks and trails, we don't know if that's a good property to take on, because we've got nothing to weigh it against. Hence the notion of moving forward with that as one of our first working groups, is create that overall system policy approach framework, and then we can appropriately evaluate something as to whether or not it fits in where we want to go. So.
Okay, thank you. I believe Councillor Roberts has his hand up. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I really like the idea of working groups. I actually had a resolution all drafted up to present to the to get on the agenda for this week's, for a new working group. And after a discussion with the clerk and the plans to have this meeting, I've held off on it. So what I can say now that I will be hopefully very soon get on the agenda of both the mayor and the CAO to discuss my thoughts on this, or what I think the working group could be. So stay tuned on that one. As far as the advisory groups or whatever, when the working groups were first proposed, I did send an email to all the Parks and Trails committee members of last term and asked them their opinion. And I got back maybe 2 responses, and they're both supportive of it. But they commented that they still like to have an opportunity to work as a group or work as individuals or whatever to help influence or identifying issues with parks. And I got thinking about this, and I think I'm correct in saying, and the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing stopping a councillor or 2 councillors from getting together with interested parties to discuss the subject, and to formulate an idea, and then for those councillors to bring it to general and finance, and so that's how I'm going to proceed on a lot of issues that can sort of be done that in the background with 2 or 3 councils, just to gain information, and then clerk can tell me whether I shouldn't do that. So I may be doing that with parks. Maybe Ruth would, Councillor Nishikawa would come with me, and we pare it down from the advisory we had before, and just looking on items that the public are seeing in a vehicle or a forum, to get back to general and finance, or don't even go to general and finance, just go to, in a particular case, go to the Director of Public Works and socialize it with him. So those are my thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you. I believe our CAO would like to.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I thank you, Councillor Robertson. I just wanted to pick up on your last point, which I believe Councillor Burry made earlier in the meeting. It's important to liaise with staff so that there aren't any surprises at a meeting. So very much appreciate that last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, through you. So I guess being one that I do like a certain structure in my life, and I would have thought that so the last term of council we had, and so Councillor Nishikawa's point, I mean, I think you were the chair of the Parks and Trails Committee, and there was a Heritage Committee. It was an Economic Development Committee. Am I to a stand, and I guess perhaps to the clerk then, does that mean that all of those are disbanded? There is no structure in the township any longer for that, and this is a new contemplation, if you will. There is no Parks and Trails Committee, there is no Heritage Committee, or there is even any contemplation that we'll have one. So that's new for me. To me, that's a change in service level, right?
So I
the
think,
public
I'm not sure if
expect.
it's the clerk. I think it's probably more our CAO or the mayor. Is that correct?
Well, from a procedural perspective, Madam Chair, I think the clerk will tell you that with that term of council, all of those committees were disbanded, the advisory committees. The procedural bylaw still allows for us to strike those advisory committees should we wish. I think what you're hearing from the mayor and myself is that we think the majority of the work can be done through the standing committees. We think that there are some weighty topics out there that we want to dig into through working groups. And I think as we establish those working groups, we'll kind of get into a rhythm as to how they work, how they report. There will be a terms of reference. There will be a work plan and a schedule associated with each of those working groups. And I think, as I said, we will get better at it as we go along, and we've gotten through a few of them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
I just wanted to give an example. Director Becking, I probably was on, I don't even know if he was here for 2 weeks. And I took Councillor Zavitz, who was a brand new councillor as well, with my handwritten notes to him saying, this is what I would like to see our direction. And we had a great conversation. We got to know each other, where we're coming from a little bit, and those kind of things. I like that approach, that, you know, I made a list, I knew what I wanted to discuss and what we had. And in fact, over time, I also saw a lot of those items be checked off. But that works as an individual counselor going directly to, and with another counselor, if that would be. But that's been a success for me personally, I would just say. And I don't have to have a committee to go through, because some of those are just answers right off the bat, but make a list and then what you want to do, your term of council, follow through with that way, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I would also add to that, if it requires resources, then your opportunity is at budget time, right? To convince your peers that that's a good idea and it should be included in the budget, or in some cases, taken out.
Okay, so do I see any other questions or comments? So just if I was to summarize my understanding at this point, if there's an idea that I had as something, I might come to the mayor and the CAO with this idea. And as a first stop, there might be some discussion to say, well, this might be an item that you could bring forward on general and finance and or planning committee. And here's a recommended approach that you could take for this particular item. Another approach might be, wow, that's a big topic. Let's use housing as the easiest one at this point. That's going to take a more time, more thoughtful, long-term thinking. And so let's just think about how we might want to approach it, when we might want to approach it, and the resources that might be required in order to do so. And that would then fall into this category of a working group. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I think it's also important to recognize as well that we're likely going to need to pay some of these activities as well because of staff capacity.
Right.
Right. So I've identified two for you. One sort of in the environmental side, in the planning and development world, and the other in the public works world. So we can have two of them, those two working groups act concurrently, but I wouldn't want to stack any more than one at a time on a particular area, because you have to remember, as I alluded to earlier, they've got their regular workload. They've already got projects on the go, right? So this is integrating those projects into that workflow.
So the capacity of staff, the capacity of council.
Correct.
And the ability to put this framework, it all becomes about the appropriate timing as well. So
Correct.
I see Mayor Kelly also would like to make a comment.
I just want to thank you through you. I just want to throw one more thing on your list. It's long-term strategic, and it's the need for the working group really arises when the specific expertise to solve a specific problem doesn't reside in-house. We've made an investment to improve generally, but we don't have experts in every area. We are going to still need to rely on them. Just generally, and I'll make it I'll make it brief, as quick as I can. This isn't change for the sake of change by any means. This isn't change because, wasn't satisfied with how our org chart looked last time. This is change because, quite frankly, and I think this of every single person on this council, we didn't stand up and run for these jobs to sit back and let people run over us with ideas and issues and change. We have to embrace change. We have to drive change. And to the extent we can be strategic and allow the more implementary, the more sort of process-driven stuff get handled either internally or occasionally through a working group externally, it frees this body up. Whether it's sitting as a committee or sitting as council, it frees this body up to be much more strategic in proposing and guiding the change that we want to see done or made here in order to protect all the things and promote all the things that we love so much about this place. So it really is a mechanism with a purpose. It's a mechanism that hopefully will change the level of service, all for the better. And it retains enough flexibility that the door's always open. If we're missing something, if we didn't catch something, we're nimble. We're not fixed to a specific program. We're fixed to a specific org chart. We'll make whatever changes are necessary as they come up to get stuff done in the right fashion, quickly and promptly, and in the best interests of our township.
Thank you. So Okay, we do have another question. Councillor Nishikawa?
Thank you. Through you to the CEO. One thing I've not understood with the Parks and Rec master plan, for example, or any of our master plans I don't really recall council having the discussion of what we want to see move forward first. You know, so there might be a list of items that are suggestions that are going out there, but I don't really recall that, and maybe I'll just say committee because I'm talking about general finance, that the committee really had the opportunity to discuss what those items should be. So for instance, if we were going to create a new trail no, I don't want to use the word trail. If there is something that we wanted to address in the different part of the township that we don't do activity in for very much, for instance, I just, my views might be very different than other councillors. So I want to move something. I've always been an advocate of moving stuff more forward towards Highway 141. I really think that that's a direction that we have ignored over the years. But I've not had that opportunity to bring that forward. And so I'm wondering, when does that happen?
Thank you.
So with respect, if I understand your question, if you're talking about the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, like the IT Master Plan, you're going to hear from Director Becking tomorrow. I'm kind of foreshadowing. You're going to hear from Director Becking tomorrow that we were fortunate that Mr. Moore was interested in and was successful in getting the position for the manager of Parks and Recreation. He's going to come back to you, I believe in August or September, with a report, an implementation plan for that master plan. So it'll sort of set those priorities, and then you can have that conversation or that discussion about everybody weighing in as to what you feel that priority is, and the group will decide in that regard.
Fantastic. Thank you. Mayor Kelly?
Thank you. And through you, very astute observation. I mean, really bang on. That I haven't figured out the logistics of delivering the message, but I can tell you a considerable amount of time and energy, and I'm talking about dozens, if not hundreds of hours, have been spent trying to translate a loosely sort of thought through vision for this place on a whiteboard in my office downstairs, and translate it into something that can be delivered up to constituents, to special interest groups, most importantly to this body. And it is the work of, you know, really one or two people. We do not play party politics here. And every one of us has but one vote. I hope in the near future, starting quite frankly, I won't even go there, but starting in the first week or second week of August, to start bringing it to life and sharing what I think is the vision. And, you know, like every vision, everyone will have something different, or hopefully everyone will see something they can grab onto in the package that's delivered. I haven't really figured out how to do that, to be honest with you. I don't think boring everybody with a dozen hours standing in front of a board at 4 consecutive council meetings is going to sell anything to anybody. So I'm not normally, in the past I've done similar exercises and not normally been constrained by the rules of procedure and quorum and so forth. Being very respectful of that, we got to start at the top and figure out this kind of lofty notion of what happens here. 25 years from now, what are we going to look like? Where are we headed? How do we get there? Who can help us get there? What has to happen, bite size at a time, to get us there? What has to happen in what order? A lot of the thought has gone into it. Some of the communications, I'd say a good chunk of the communications work with the able assistance of Colleen has translated into something that's useful, I hope. And now the question is, how do we get it out of, you know, off of a couple of computers and generally understood. I'm going to take anybody's advice as to how that can happen. I think it needs to be shared with the community at the same time, frankly. I think it needs to gather a kind of momentum of its own. I think it needs to have the step that hasn't been taken is prioritization and identifying, first steps, second, fourth, fifth steps. How do we know when we're done? Kind of steps. A lot of it is sort of a vicious cycle of how do you promote housing development in the absence of jobs and vice versa? How do you promote jobs and growing the economy in the absence of having anywhere to put people? So your point is very well taken. There is input that needs to be gathered from everybody, hopefully support that will be rendered from everybody or taken from everybody. And at the end of the day, we'll have something of a guiding principle or focus so that we all know why we're doing this. So we all know what the end goal is, and we'll know how, quickly we can retire. But thank you for the question.
Would you like to add?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
so I think what the mayor is talking about is framing the conversation around the next update to our strategic plan, right? The next iteration, the next generation of actions that we're going to take to move this place forward. And I think from all of these studies we've been doing over the last few years, I think take a look at Mr. Donaldson's report on the budget process. Right, in terms of some of the messaging in there as to next steps, the next critical steps in our journey.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm seeing none. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I think a working group would work, provided we listen. Because I've talked to different people who were on hall boards and that are no longer on them because they said the township staff do not listen. We put something forward, they just ignore it. And this goes on and on. If you check Mr. Donaldson's report and that tomorrow, I think it is, we spent $660 some odd thousand on reports and that. If we've got people that could help and bring it and get what they want, we wouldn't have to be spending all this money on consultants that live in Toronto that bring everything up. I've been saying this for years, and that we should listen to what the people want, get them involved in it a little bit more. And I think we could do an awful lot better than we're doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, through you. I think there's a difference between listening and agreeing. And one can listen and disagree if there are other pieces of the puzzle. I received a note this morning saying, why can't this particular group get the community center for free? And my response was, oh, are you advocating for a tax change, an increase in taxes, so that we don't have a user pay model for community centers anymore? We're gonna fund them through our budget. So I think, with all due respect to all councillors, a part of what we're here for is to make the strategic decisions around how we allocate budget. And that's the piece that we're going to need some help from people. But it may not mean that we're going to agree with everything we're told by all of our constituents, but that doesn't mean that we're not listening. So I think there's a pretty strong piece around the difference between listening and hearing, but disagreeing.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
we're going to have to make some tough decisions.
Thank you. And okay, so now I'd like to hear from the CEO first.
Well, Madam Chair, I wasn't going to jump into the conversation. I had a question, but that can
Okay.
wait if you wish to take other comments from members.
Thank you. Okay, you're okay? Okay.
So I guess my question for you, committee, is are you interested in staff bringing forward those two concepts?
Committee, I think the two concepts being a working group in terms of reference for the integrated watershed management, and the second one being the Parks and Trails policy framework. Is that the question? Okay, so sorry, no, the question from our CAO has, yes, I just want to confirm that that's what you're asking for, right? Is the
Yes.
next step, staff coming back with, then this is what this could look like.
Yes.
Okay. So Councillor Zavitz and then Councillor Kent. Oh, sorry, your microphone, please.
To answer those two questions would be to, first of all, need to understand what is integrated watershed management. And the second point, I mean, that for us to agree to that today is huge. I mean, do I want that as a focus? You know, if I'm to vote, I think there's just a ton of things we need to understand and consider. That's what this discussion has been around. So if all of a sudden those two come forward and that's what we're going to focus on first as in working groups, I wouldn't be supportive of that today, for sure. I wouldn't understand the focus of the terms of reference as our good CAO has mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you.
And Mayor Kelly.
My reaction to that is that those are two good initiatives and those are two things we have to focus on, but I continue to say we got to deal with construction and planning and philosophy. And we had a conversation one time that was back and forth in one of the meetings where I said, it's our job to set the philosophy about construction and development and building and say no and yes, obviously based upon bylaws, which are developed based upon philosophy. But before we start worrying about those, I want that one to be a working group. That's the much more important, in my opinion, than the two others. I think water is very important, but I think we got to focus on this construction and development thing. It was, again, one of the things that we all stood up and said we were going to deal with as counselors. So when you get around to creating the proper list of working groups, I put that right at the top of the list.
Okay,
personally.
thank you. I see Mayor
But I
Kelly
hear
and
that every single day.
Councillor Roberts, I do see you. Mayor Kelly's going to go and then Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Through you quickly on the integrated watershed management, we might want to hold off till tomorrow because I think, do we not have an amendment to the agenda to include?
That's my understanding, yes.
My understanding was we were going to hear from the Watershed Council tomorrow, who are responsible for the district's effort on the integrated watershed. I may be wrong. Maybe I'm out of turn.
No, that is my understanding.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
How can I,
So Madam Chair,
Yeah.
perhaps I could reframe the question because obviously it was kind of general. I'm thinking about what would happen is that we could bring forward a terms of reference for those items as examples, which would give you a bit of background on the topic. You don't need to make any decisions at this point. I'm just saying that would come forward at a future meeting and then we could have a further conversation about it.
thank you. Okay, Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. Through you, I would find topics of, higher up that list, for example, would be the transportation master plan, which I think is probably coming forward over the next month or two. To me, that's going to be much more important than everybody in Muskoka looking at the water. I mean, we all care about the water, but everybody's looking at the water and quite honestly, we just flooded again. So, that's a big one. So my sense is that we have parks and trails, we have arenas, we have the transportation master plan and parking and landings. There's a lot of right now and here things that we need to discuss. I think more than that esoteric integrated watershed management. Like everybody else is doing it. Why would we do it too?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I would not be supportive of bringing a work plan together for parks and trails. That was one of the items on the 110 items that the public had identified had to be happen. We had 4 priorities that was identified by the working committee, cost $200,000 for this report, and they had 4 priorities to start with. And we've done, we've started the feasibility report. The one that we're working on and we're talking about which is key and critical in the executive summary on page 9, was an implementation plan. Now, the implementation plan has already been suggested by the committee of what to do. What is needed is not for staff to go away and develop an implementation plan. but there needs to be an implementation plan with from a committee that says this is what we think we really got to focus on in 2024. So right now, the prime focus for the parks and recreation facilities is the 2024 budget, because Mr. Moore has a complete work load right now and couldn't start anything else. So we need to prepare for 2024. So I would not be supportive of this time just on that one particular item. I think that's a good item, but it should be put up against all the other priority items that the steering committee, or not steering, the working committee for the Parks and Trails did. Thank you.
Okay, so
So Madam Chair, things like the Parks and Recreation Master Plan implementation plan, identifying priorities in that area, they need to be established by this group. Transportation Master Plan, same idea. Going through the standing committee and council, they will be dealt with. These are different items that I'm talking about, more strategic initiatives that we could undertake. That said, if committee's not interested in proceeding at this time, then I'm in your hands.
I think that that's an important, if even using maybe a slightly different example with the transportation master plan. Just for clarification, there will be items that come out of that plan, some of which, as a standing committee, we will be able to address, and some of which may trigger the thought of, hey, this might be a good idea for a future working group. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that the two that are in front of us today, upon your recommendations, are ones that you think we could start on today, because we've done all of that foundational stuff to date. And these would make sense from a capacity standpoint. And then, is that correct? I just want to
Yes.
make sure I'm clear. Okay. Councilor Nishikawa and then Councilor McIntyre.
Thank you. Through you, I'm really challenged with the watershed discussion and what our council can do at all. You know, we have district councilors that speak on behalf of all of council about this, but honestly, I'm not sure about the workload that we're putting on staff to provide this background information, when in fact, I really don't feel that the Township of Muskoka Lakes has much input, period. And so I want to find another example, and I don't mind the Parks and Rec example. Bring forward an example of what that working group or whatever you want to label it, but not that one. I really am challenged that we would expect any time from staff to go into this one, because it is a much bigger and, quite frankly, controlled by others. You know, so while we might have a once a year input of saying, look, you're screwing us over here, kind of whatever it is, you know, that's how everybody feels when it comes to their places flooding. But in reality, I would rather pick something else. And so I liked the idea. And again, in past councils, we used to have more discussion about our roads and public works in general. And I don't know if that's a working group or not, but I'm just suggesting that I'm not interested in the watershed, the Parks and Rec, just as an example. If you want to do that, I just don't want a lot of staff time put into something that we actually don't have much input in, or it doesn't feel that way anyhow. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Councilor McIntyre.
Hi. I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I'm really excited about it all, because I think there's an awful lot of things we can do. And the advantage to me is we can also bring the community into these committees, and the community members can also take the message back to the communities as well as us doing it. I would be really interested if there's some way that we could, as a group, just have an open discussion about what our dreams and visions are for what working groups we want. Because I know each one of us was elected because we felt strongly about things. And I can think of 3 or 4 working groups I would love to be involved in. So is there any way in this process where we can just have an informal discussion of throwing ideas in the air of what kinds of working groups we're interested in?
So I think,
There you go.
I think that I need to ask either the CA or the mayor, because I think that's part of the process of determining what, if there's an idea, what would naturally go on to a standing committee versus what could be the formation of a working group. So
I think
I think you both have touched upon it. I just need help.
right, I think we
summarizing
had
it.
envisioned folks coming to us and we help frame the idea and it comes back to the group.
Okay. So versus the approach that I'm hearing Councillor McIntyre saying, is there an opportunity to brainstorm, which it's difficult in this format or put forward ideas and priorities. The vehicle to do that is to go through the 2 of you at this point with
Well,
ideas.
That's what we had envisioned.
Yeah.
If you want to have a facilitated session, I'm not opposed to that, in terms of identifying priorities.
Okay. No,
Just,
thank you.
and
Mayor Kelly.
through you, thank you, through you. I'm going to suggest that we probably have accomplished a lot already today. We've gotten through the clerk, the CAO's presentation. I think we've got kind of conceptual buy-in to the concept of working group, the identification of how they work, and that I don't even think I could describe it in 10,000 words. I think we're going to have to put a stake in the ground with something of substance that needs to be resolved, fixed, planned, whatever the right word is, and for which we do not think the resources exist internally. The first 2 attempts have kind of not resonated, maybe because we just don't have the energy to sell them. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think if we stop here, I kind of like the idea of sharing a sense of at least priorities. The one concern that I do have when I talked about working groups in whatever month this in June was suddenly everything's a working group. Like, what's that old saying? You know, if you walk around with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All of a sudden, I was getting phone calls. Oh, I got an idea. We need a working group. You know, we need well, we don't need 800 working groups. What we need to do is identify something that is strategic, something that is a contributor to the vision we will have for the future of this township, and something which can't be resolved around this table either because of time or skills, but probably both. And we'll pick a group of people, some internal, some external, to help us get over the hurdle and fix that. I don't know that that's going to happen today. I have a sense that that's not going to happen today, and that maybe we stop where we are right now, regroup around whether a facilitated meeting, whether it should jive with a strategic planning exercise, whether it should jive with a quick walk through the flip charts and whiteboards that I like to use so bad. But I think maybe for now, we've probably run to the end of the routine for today.
Okay. Councillor Kent.
Thank you. Just to go one step further on what the mayor said is, could we not, and Councillor Marion, could we not make a list? You guys could come back with a list of, you know, he mentioned 5 or 6, I mentioned 1, you mentioned 1. And then within that list, you could take a first shot of saying, well, this belongs in a working group and this belongs in a standing committee. So you take the list of 20 topics that come up from all of us, and we'll end up with only 1 or 2 that are really important that we're going to, you know, focus on this year as a working group. But if we could get everybody's thoughts on 1 sheet of paper, maybe that's a way we could move this forward. And then we'd quickly categorize them into ones that belong to standing committees and everything that's left out, everything that's left.
So I just want to ask a quick question. Is that something that is achievable without having to get everybody together through a facilitated session? I feel like there's probably, to Councillor McIntyre's comment earlier, people probably have their interests, and maybe as a first exercise, we have every idea come forward to you and come back and say, here are the things I've heard. Here is why I think this would belong here, and it would help with some kind of level of decision making. And it would I don't know if that's an appropriate.
So I would say yes, Madam Chair, but please email me individually.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right,
thank you.
right,
Okay,
okay.
I'm sorry, Mary. I just wanted to make sure I understood. Okay, Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. Through you, I'm going to suggest that CAO or me, I don't care who wants to take the responsibility, shoot a note to everyone on council. And I think first and foremost, let's stick to not all ats, all right, or respond to all. We will do it individually just for keep us all out of the soup from a quorum perspective. But, there's a few boxes that you as the counselor that's going to be promoting one of these strategic exercises are going to have to, in your own mind, hit. Is it a strategic issue? Is it contribute to the long-term health of some vision that you have that hopefully ultimately we will all share for the future of the township? Is it actionable? I mean, we can wish all we want, but no matter how many committees and groups you put together, you can't make wishes come true. So is it actionable? Does it just take some thought and effort? And is there a reason to believe we don't have the time or the skills to do it internally? I think that's probably the fourth criteria. You can check those boxes and send them back to the CAO. I actually, unlike the chair's suggestion, I like these facilitated sessions. Only way we're going to get good at this is if we figure out where we've gone astray. And so we can walk through each of those, identify which ones truly do hit the box, which ones really do merit follow-up and more attention. And I know it's time of ours, but I think at some point, this is where we need to invest our time. This is becoming more strategic, 101, basically.
Okay, so I'm seeing two hands at the same time. So I think I'm going to go Councillor McIntyre and then yourself.
I think I have a great idea. The only thing that I would say is I also want to hear what other people are saying. So if there's some way that we can, I don't know. I want to know other people's ideas.
So, yeah, and I think that was the intent when I was trying to summarize and think how to facilitate this. If everybody was to input their ideas, the central database would then come back to us and we would say, okay, so look, actually 6 out of the 10 of us all think this might be an interesting idea. Then it becomes an interesting part to the next conversation. So it's not about not having it. It would just be having something at the time to start that conversation beyond the 2 that are here today. And okay, one more.
Just one, so when this is happening, then if there's some way that when everybody sends you the ideas, can we get copies of them too or something? No.
He's gonna come back.
He's going to come back. That's what
That's
I think the whole idea is. What it does, it's a staff report that comes back that helps to facilitate that next discussion versus just having it an open whiteboard. Everybody at least has an opportunity to do that initial input. And then staff can come back and say, here's some thoughts. Councillor Zavitz?
Thank you. It's for you. So the word strategic is being just banged around in this room. The strategic plan 4.5 years ago, we were on the phone. There was COVID. We crafted through our good CAO. We crafted, I think, a really incredible strategic plan, and it identified so many things. Transportation was an issue, parks and trails was an issue, asset management was an issue. Many things were issues. What are we going to do with our arenas, et cetera, within those plans? So, it seems kind of funny to me. We're almost answering a question that nobody asked, which is, do we actually need more to do? The plans themselves, which we just spent $600,000 on, are to identify to us as a group and our staff what we're to focus on. So I think we already know, my God, if you went through the plans right now, you wouldn't have we don't need a strategic meeting again. We know what we need to focus on. There's so many we can't possibly deal with them all. And my point is that if we just eat the elephant one bite at a time, let's get back to that strategic plan. Let's get back to those plans that we're paying all this money for and just start checking off the boxes. 131 requirements on the recreation plan alone. And we're looking for new stuff to do. Wow. So my vote would be that we would really focus strategically on the elements that we've already identified that we know are in our wheelhouse and start, maybe have committees about that. get some of those things done. Arenas is gonna be a brute, right? But we're gonna, as this council, are gonna deal with that. We're gonna have to. You know, should we change our tax law and not charge, community centers for, these are all big, huge issues, and we're looking for other stuff to do. I think that's a big one. That's a huge one. We should deal with these.
So I think I do need your help, but I'm trying to also delineate, once again, what is going to come to standing committee and coming out of our strategic plan versus what the concept of these working groups is. So what working groups are things that I'm trying to use the word capacity. I've been trying to go back to your presentation to say, if we don't feel operationally today, we have the bench strength, and I'm going to call it capacity, and we still think a topic warrants a further review or understanding, staff and or the mayor have come back with some suggestions to start with, based upon all of the background information and knowledge that they have. So capacity is, do we have the internal resources or expertise? And if we don't, and we see that we think that there's value, then this would be a topic for a working group. And that's when we could go and ask either a consultant or constituents that actually have outside expertise in order to help perhaps chart a path forward. I'm trying to make sure I'm summarizing in my own mind that I think that's what the concept of these working groups is. It's not to take away from the to-do lists that are happening every day.
You are correct. And Councillor Zawitz's point, there may be something that comes out of some of one of those studies that we want to assign a working group to as well.
Okay. So as far as a path forward, I think at this point we need to have a path forward, and I might look to the mayor and our CAO to help summarize what we could do as next steps to help filter ideas and advance.
So Madam Chair, I thought my understanding is that I'll send out a note to members of council with some guidelines. You'll respond. I'll come back probably in a facilitated session, because I'm not sure that it's really during a regular meeting, because our agendas are pretty heavy, and we'll have a further conversation.
Okay. And Mayor Kelly?
And thank you. And through you, just to take Councillor Zawitz's comment to heart, I'm going to add a fifth criteria. Actionable, visionary, skills not internal, and not already being done by somebody else. Because the arena, for instance, is already in the works, and it's going to be handled at this level by this body. So that's not the subject of a working group, not certainly by my understanding anyhow. So we'll make that a fifth criteria. If somebody's already doing it, we're not going to redo it.
Right.
Or not / financial implications, because you are the financial stewards.
Correct.
As it relates to the township.
Okay, so I feel like we do have a path forward now on this one. We will reconvene, but this has been a very, very helpful conversation. I think it's really important. We don't get this opportunity very often, ever, really, just to start putting ideas out on the table and understanding how we want to govern this place. So thank you for taking it to the next step, and we'll get there, it sounds like.
Thank you.
Committee, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, do I? Okay, I believe I can read a resolution, correct? Okay, so moved by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved that this meeting adjourn at 11:52. Okay, 11:52 a.m. And the next regular meeting of General Finance Committee will be held on Wednesday, July 12th, 2023 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair electronically from the council chambers municipal office in Port Carling, Ontario. All those in favor? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. Have a wonderful lunch.